We have people joining through various methods this morning, and so I'd like to invite those participating in the committee room to introduce themselves first, please.
Good morning, Roger Reid, MLA for Livingston-McLeod and Deputy Chair of Committee.
Morning, everyone. Cyril Turton, MLA for Spruce Grove, Stony Plain.
Good morning, Tavinder Toor, MLA Calgary Falconage.
Good morning, Jordan Walker, MLA Sherwood Park.
Good morning, everyone. Jackie Lovely, Camrose constituency.
Good morning, everyone. Peter Singh, MLA Calgary East.
Marlon Schmidt, Edmonton Gold Bar.
Marie Renaud, St. Albert.
Good morning, Raki Pancholi, Edmonton Whitemud.
Good morning, Nancy Rivera, Clerk of Journals and Committees.
Good morning, Aaron Roth, Committee Clerk.
All right, thank you. We also have a number of people joining us by video conference today. If the other participants I see, Jackie Armstrong Hominiak and Garth Rosewell from the Government Caucus joining us today. I don't know if there are any others. If you could, any committee members, introduce yourselves for the record, and then we will move on to hearing from the officials.
MLA Jackie Armstrong Hominiak, Fort Saskatchewan, Bakerville.
Okay, very good. We all are also joined here this morning by the folks from the Auditor General's office. We have Mr. Doug Wiley, the Auditor General, and Mr. Rob Dreesen and Mr. Brad Ireland, Assistant Auditors General, joining us on a line as well. I am not noting any substitutions today, friends, unless any of you speak up. And so we'll just move on to the housekeeping items at hand here. The masks are to be worn in the committee room except when you are speaking as usual, and members are invited to take them off or leave them on, whichever at your discretion. Your microphones are operated by Hansard, and our committee proceedings are live streamed on the internet and broadcast on Alberta Assembly TV. When you are on video conference, please turn on your camera while speaking and mute your microphone when not speaking. And members participating virtually who want to be put on the speakers list, just send a message to the committee clerk. And members in the room, you can signal and I will be watching. But if I miss you, please do feel free to put something in the chat because I am participating virtually today. And for points of order, please do just speak up, friends, because sometimes I will not see you when I am chairing virtually. The public galleries are closed, and we'll now move to the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes or additions to today's agenda? Seeing none, then would a member please move that the agenda for the November 2nd, 2021 meeting of the Standing Committee of Public Accounts be approved and distributed?
Madam Chair, I would like to move.
I see that moved by Member Reid. Thank you. Is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing none.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Thank you. That motion is carried. Members, please remute. We'll now move on to the approval of our minutes. We have the minutes from last week's meeting on October 26th. Members, do you have any errors or additions to note? Seeing none, would member please then move that the minutes of the October 26th meeting of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts be approved as distributed?
I move.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I believe that was Member Renaud. Thank you. Is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Thank you. That motion is carried. Friends, we will now welcome the officials from the Ministry of Education who are here to address the Auditor General outstanding recommendations, as well as the Ministry's annual report and any other matters having been dealt with by the Auditor General. And I will invite officials from the Ministry to provide their opening remarks of 10 minutes. Welcome, Deputy. I know that officials have been here before, but just say your name and your position when you begin speaking, and then for any other officials, ADMs, and I'll otherwise just say your name and title before you begin, the first time you begin speaking, so that Hansard can appropriately identify you. Your time begins when you begin speaking.
Committee Chair Phillips, can you hear me okay?
I certainly can, and I'm seeing some nods from inside the room.
Perfect, thanks. And so, good morning. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. It's a very important process, the public accounts process. And I know in my career, I've had the opportunity to work with this committee through this process a number of times, and I am looking forward to the conversation today. I am joined at table with Christine Sewell, our Acting Assistant Deputy Minister of Financial Services, and Emily Ma, Director of Budget, Fiscal Analysis within Financial Services as well. Also in the room, I have Kindy Joseph, ADM of Program and System Supports, Jeff Willen, ADM of Strategic Services and Governance, Jennifer Cassidy, Acting ADM of Curriculum Division, and Dan Karras, Acting ADM of System Excellence. And today I'm going to provide a brief overview of our annual report accomplishments for the 2021 fiscal year and the status on our outstanding Auditor General recommendations. In Budget 2020, government upheld its commitment to maintain or increase funding to core social services. Education's total budget from an operating expense point of view was $8.3 billion. A more efficient and sustainable funding model for K-12 was introduced in the 2021 school year. And this new model gives authorities predictable funding and more flexibility to best meet local needs at a school authority level. Most school authorities across Alberta experienced enrollment decline due to COVID-19. School authorities would have received less funding under the previous funding model. So the new funding model that was implemented in 2021 actually resulted in more funding for the system in comparison to the old model. School authorities were provided with all the funds committed to them for the 2021 school year, plus additional funding for COVID-19 to a total of $263 million from the federal government in the Safe Return to Class funding program that was implemented. School boards spent cautiously in 2021 due to lower than expected enrollments and shifts to online learning that decreased expenditures, such as busing and the use of substitute teachers in some cases. In terms of COVID actions, the department took significant actions to address COVID impacts on student learning. These included supporting schools to use multiple approaches to deliver content when in person or when individuals were diverted online. That also included collaboration with school authorities so students had the technology they needed to participate online. Provincial Education Helpline was created to support families, particularly parents of children with disabilities and parents that were having children take instruction at home. For the 2021 school year, we made provincial exams optional and distributed the aforementioned $263 million from the federal government. This funding supported at-home and online learning, adaptation of learning spaces within our schools, and some facility alterations in response to COVID. Government accelerated $250 million of capital maintenance, and $44 million of that was used for mechanical upgrades related to HVAC, which obviously is an important part of our infrastructure asset base during a pandemic. A comprehensive reentry plan was developed for the 2021 school year to support schools to prepare for in-school learning while prioritizing the safety of students and school staff in our system. The plan included guidance on a wider range of operational issues, including hygiene, health requirements, student learning, well-being, transportation, and, as I mentioned, diploma exams. Education also distributed PPE to every student, teacher, and staff member early on in the pandemic response. On page 14 of the annual report, there's an in-depth summary of actions taken in 2020 and 2021 to address COVID. As the annual report shows, education worked on 4 outcomes from its business plan and achieved a number of key milestones in 2021. The new ministerial order on student learning and the guiding framework for the design and development of kindergarten to grade 12 provincial curriculum was released. And these two documents set the vision and parameters and objectives around the development of new curriculum for the K-12 system. And obviously, we're working on the implementation of K-6 currently. Shifting gears, the Choice in Education Act received royal assent and took effect in September 1st of 2020. The act was informed by feedback gathered from education partners, parents, students, and the general public through significant engagement efforts. The act strengthens Alberta's successful history of educational choice by affirming that parents have the right to choose the kind of education they feel is best for their children, supporting the creation of new charter schools, including vocation-focused charter schools, protecting the status of independent schools, and providing a new option for parents who choose to homeschool their children. Alberta Education updated the K-12 funding model to improve funding and accountability processes and help Albertans feel confident that the education system is meeting student needs. The new model provides more predictable funding to school authorities and more flexibility, as I mentioned before, by implementing a 3-year weighted moving average methodology. We also developed and implemented plans and strategies to support school capital planning and revised these policies and processes to ensure that we were delivering on our capital priorities with a minimal amount of red tape. And so during the 2021 school year, we completed 20 schools across the province and modernized another 11. In addition, 5 schools were slated for replacement, and together all of these projects equaled nearly $275 million over a 3-year period. Other key highlights with the annual report, it's worth noting, in 2021, Alberta's education budget funded a projected 730,000 children and students. Only 705 were actually registered in ECS to grade 12 across the province. Despite that lower enrollment, we did maintain funding within the system in order to support school authorities in managing COVID and inconsistencies with enrollment. The draft K-6 draft was released in March 2021 and is open for public input and remains that way until the spring of 2022. And we are still focusing on implementing that in September of 2022. Alberta Education also invested in $5.5 million to build 27 playgrounds. And we undertook a significant amount of effort to reduce red tape with a 15% reduction in requirements within the department for reporting, forms, and other elements of application processes that are present within the department. I'll shift gears now to our Auditor General recommendations. So Northland School Division, I'll focus there. In March 2015, the Auditor General made 3 recommendations regarding Northland School Division. One recommendation was directed to Alberta Education. The other 2 were actually directed to the school board. Significant progress has been made. I will speak to the recommendation directed to education. The Auditor General recommended the department exercise oversight of Northland School Division by ensuring the division develops and executes the recommended operational plan to improve student attendance, and the operational plan identifies the resources needed and how the results will be measured and reported related to attendance. Northland has developed and implemented a comprehensive attendance improvement operational plan that outlines numerous strategies to improve student attendance and engagement, including targets to measure progress in these objectives. They have standardized attendance tracking processes in schools across their division and are providing them ongoing guidance, training, and recording and monitoring of these processes. Education has developed a student attendance oversight plan, which is guiding our work and providing advice and leadership to Northland. Through education's oversight, the Auditor General recommendations for Northland and education have been fully implemented. But I think it is worth noting that the pandemic has had a significant impact on attendance, not only in Northland, but across the system. So results of all of that work that Northland has undertaken over the last number of years.
Thank you, Deputy. And we'll now move on to the Auditor General for his opening comments, not exceeding 5 minutes.
Well, good morning, Chair and Deputy Minister and all committee members. It's great to be with you this morning. I'll maybe pick up where the deputy left off, if I could, Chair. And I'm not speaking for the deputy here. I'll just put things from to the committee from my perspective. With respect to the outstanding recommendations at Northland School Division, and as the deputy indicated, significant progress has been made. We do understand, though, that right now the department and the school division are not ready for us to come in and actually follow those up. I think, as the deputy was indicating, they're waiting for the impact of COVID to pass. So I understand they've made the improvements, but the results are not being achieved given COVID for the last year. So we'll follow that recommendation, or those recommendations up, pardon me, when we understand that they're ready for us to come in and look at it. The one recommendation, so we have 4 recommendations outstanding at the ministry. The deputy referred to the 3. The one that he did not mention was dealing with in 2018, we'd made a recommendation to the department that it improve its processes related to the monitoring, assessing, and reporting on school jurisdictions' accumulated reserve balances. Now, as the committee members will know, the accumulated operating reserves are an important financial indicator within the education sector. So, you know, there were metrics and checks and balances put in place that the department having oversight for. We looked at those processes, and essentially we found that the department was not applying its oversight processes consistently. Now, the department has indicated improvements have been made, and I can report to the committee that we're actually in the final stages now of completing our assessment of the department's progress, and we will be reporting the results of that work in our upcoming fall report, which will be released very shortly. So I think that covers them, Chair. Again, we have 4 recommendations that are currently in the outstanding status, but with respect to the first one on reserve balances, we're doing the work and we're reporting that shortly. And with respect to the 3 relating to the Northland School Division, we will wait for the department and school division to indicate they're fully implemented, and then we'll come in and do that follow-up work and report to the legislature when our work is done. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you. So we'll now move to our first rotation, which is 12 minutes for the official. We'll begin with official opposition. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the department officials for being here today. Deputy, I'm just going to begin by saying if I cut you off at any point, my apologies. I'm not trying to be rude. We just have very limited amount of time here to chat about a very important subject. So, Deputy, you mentioned a number of times in your opening comments, and it's mentioned in the annual report, that the expected enrollment for the 2020-21 school year was 730,000 students were projected, but only 705,000 actually registered, which means that there were 25,000 fewer Alberta students registered in school last year. That is a concern. I believe we need to have a little bit more information about what happened to those students and what efforts were made to ensure that those students actually received schooling in the last school year. And so I'm going to begin by asking that you table in writing for this committee a detailed breakdown, disaggregate those 25,000 students who were expected to enroll that didn't register. And if you could disaggregate it by the following: by grade across the province, including anticipated enrollment versus the actuals, and then by grade for each school division, including anticipated enrollment versus actual. So I'll just ask you to make a commitment that you'll table that in writing with the committee. I see a nod, so I will say yes. Okay, so moving on. So what can you tell us, Deputy, about who those 25,000 Alberta students were that did not register for school last year, and whether or not they actually received any formal education at all?
Thank you very much for the question. It's a foundational one. There's a number of different points I want to make with regards to enrollment. First off, a significant amount of those individuals actually moved to a homeschool environment. And so about 10,000 individuals moved from a homeschool environment and were obviously picked up by our funding model. There was also a significant amount of reduction in kindergarten enrollment. And I think that, intuitively, most people would understand that kindergarten is optional in the province, and parents during the pandemic made a decision to hold individuals back from going into kindergarten. So those are the two primary drivers behind the reduced enrollment.
Thank you, Deputy. I'm going to ask a few more questions about that. So with respect to the home education students, why would that have not still been picked up as registered students? Because as you mentioned, they're picked up by the funding model. So why would those students not appear in your enrollment? As well as, were those students all receiving supervised home education programs, meaning supervised by an accredited private school or by a school authority?
So our school students are picked up. It's just in a different operating expense. So I don't know, Christine, if you want to provide a bit of detail on how the breakdown exists between school students in the school versus homeschool students. So we will provide that breakdown for you if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, thank you. I'd appreciate if you could also indicate, yes, how many were actually, because you mentioned the Choice in Education Act as well, so how many of those students were being basically registered in a home education program without supervision? I want to go back to the kindergarten. You may be aware that Alberta actually scores the lowest in the country with respect to investment in early childhood education. You mentioned that kindergarten is optional. I'm actually a parent of a child who was in kindergarten last year. And I know from, and this is a bit anecdotal of course, from a number of parents of children the same age as my daughter, that they chose not to register their child in kindergarten because they did not feel it was safe to do so. So given the big drop in enrollment in those younger grades in kindergarten and ECS programs, you're indicating that's a big portion of it, I want to know what efforts the department made to ensure that parents felt it was safe to send their children to school last year.
So I want Christine to answer your previous question regarding the numbers around homeschool kids in terms of how they're incorporated into the budget. Did you want us to answer that question? Because we can.
If you could answer that question in writing, sorry, just because we have a limited time. So I'd really like to talk about these kindergarten age students and what efforts the ministry made to ensure that those youngest students were enrolled in school last year.
So maybe I'll talk a bit about how the COVID response worked within the Alberta government with regards to K-12. So obviously, the education department had a significant role to play in implementing specific programming to support schools across the system, to helping schools work through operational challenges that they may be dealing with, and to stabilize funding for school boards and school authorities. We worked in partnership with health to implement strategies that were public health related, but those public health related strategies were at the discretion of the Chief Medical Officer of Health. So I know there's going to be a lot of conversation around COVID today. I want to kind of level set the roles and responsibilities with each of the two departments. And so I think
thank you, Deputy. Sorry, thank you. I appreciate that. But your outcome one of your business plan for Alberta education is to ensure that Alberta students are successful. I understand that there are health measures that are taken by different departments, but ultimately your department is responsible for ensuring the success of Alberta students. We're hearing today that 25,000 students last year were not registered in school. A big portion of that were younger students. I'm asking what steps your ministry took to ensure that students, all Alberta students, were successful, which is one of your stated outcomes. And I'm asking what additional measures you took as a department to ensure that those students got an education last year.
Yeah, and your question around what we did to support students, happy to answer that. Number one, we provided stable funding for the system to use in terms of all of the programs that are delivered by school authorities, even though enrollment was lower. That's number one. Number two, we very early in the process provided PPE and hygiene supplies and cleaning supplies for the entire system to support in classroom instruction. We provided guidance through our reentry plan that helped provide advice and context for local school authorities to make decisions on how to deliver curriculum across the system during a pandemic. We were able to access federal funds that were above and beyond what the province provided for school operators. We actually worked with individual school authorities to shift classrooms, grade cohorts, and in some occasions schools in order to respond to operational circumstances that were prevalent in a local context. We work daily with health to advise them on public health policy decisions that they were making, not only within the context of grade 1 or kindergarten, but also across the entire system. And we had daily contact with school authorities across the system to ensure that they have suitable information they needed from the Chief Medical Officer of Health to make those important
Thank you,
local
Deputy.
decisions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. What I'm asking, though, and I appreciate all those efforts, but what I'm saying is, ultimately, at the beginning of the September 2021 school year, you would have seen a big drop in enrollment. It was clear that schools were making decisions about moving online. Some were, obviously providing in-school instruction. You would have seen, as a department, information about the lower enrollment, the drop in enrollment. And other than, for a parent, hearing that there's a new funding model does not provide the security they need to know that their child is going to be safe to go to school. That was the direct question. I'm asking what responsibility your ministry took, either working directly with school boards who showed that they were having lower enrollment than expected. Maybe it was all of them, and again, we're looking for that breakdown. But what efforts did you take as a ministry when you saw that decline in enrollment, knowing the long-term impacts of that, to actually communicate with Alberta parents to ensure that more students are registered in school?
As a department to ensure more kids are registered in school at a kindergarten level, that's an individual parent choice. So parents choose to opt their kids in or out of kindergarten. So I just want to clear that element up. In terms of what we did with school boards is what I ultimately just articulated a few minutes ago. Even though we knew there was an enrollment reduction in many of our school authorities across the province, we still maintained funding for those school authorities so they could deliver essential programming, implement COVID protocols, and ensure that the classroom environment was as safe for our kids as it needed to be in order to deliver services.
Deputy, sorry, apologies. I've only got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to continue on because I also want to ask about children with disabilities, because I was hearing from many parents saying that last year, the year which is under consideration under this annual report, was a year where students with disabilities, essentially, many did not even get schooling. I had parents say, we just wrote off the year for education. So can you provide some information for this committee, and whether you could table it in writing if you don't have it available right now, as to how many of those students who did not register for the school year last year were children who are identified with disabilities, either coded or scheduled to were receiving PUF funding in the ECS year prior to kindergarten? Can you also indicate how many, if you were keeping track of how many of those children with disabilities maintained enrollment in school during that, actively were receiving an education program throughout that school year, and any information about what efforts your ministry took to ensure that students with disabilities continue to have an active education program during the school year?
I'd like to try and answer that if you wouldn't mind. So one important, I think, contextual piece for the last year is that even when we were shifting schools or the entire system or a region of the province to online learning, students with specialized needs were still able to access in-person instruction with the appropriate health guidelines in place. And so I just want to clear up any misconception that there was an exemption provided for individuals with specialized needs. to still continue to access that important support in the school, regardless of what was happening with that individual school or board or region from an online learning perspective. So I just want to make sure that that's really clear, that we were very sensitive to that particular student population.
First block of time, which is 12 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Tremblay, and the rest of the department officials for coming here today. Obviously, having a very young riding. I think Spruce Grove and Stony Plain has one of the youngest average ages out of any riding in the province. I know Spruce Grove is also one of the fastest growing communities in the country. And everywhere you look, there's kids, and education is obviously a huge priority for myself and my constituents. So I have a number of questions, many which will actually also pertain to COVID response, because I know that's obviously a huge issue for many parents and elected officials right across the country, across the country and the province. So my first couple questions revolve around pages 14, 15 of the annual report. And it really talks about the COVID-19 impacts on student learning and well-being. So the impact on children across the province was significant, from COVID-19, and so I just want to ask a couple of questions regarding that. So I know your ministry provided additional funds to school authorities to assist in a safe return to in-person learning. And, I was wondering if you can perhaps identify where those funds were being drawn from and how are they being distributed. I know that school authorities are varied right across the entire province, and so it'd be interesting to see your rationale and how those funds were being distributed to help out school authorities and children right around Alberta.
Sure, thanks for the question. And so in 2021, school authorities had access to more than $1 billion in additional funds, of which 3/4 was directed to taxpayers. Obviously, this included $250 million in capital maintenance, $43 million and critical worker benefit, additional funding for PPE, additional funding for online learning. As I mentioned, an additional $250 million from the federal government. Even though enrollment was down, we still maintained what would have been $130 million in lost funding under the previous model, and a number of other funding elements that school authorities benefited from.
Excellent. No, thank you very much for the answer. And I just want to, at this point, also just highlight the incredible work that the school authorities in my riding have been doing, and just give a little bit of a shout out to Parkland School Division, Evergreen School Division, St. Matthew's School, and Living Waters, because obviously they had very trying circumstances dealing with COVID and obviously making sure that the kids receive a good education. But from the conversations that many of those education professionals have told me, is that they were concerned about some of the conditional requirements for the use of some of those funds and supports that the province gave. So I guess my question is, can the ministry please provide the committee with the conditional requirements for school authorities in the use of those funds? Obviously, many school authorities around the province are concerned about extra strings being attached that just make it a little bit more of an issue with trying to disperse those funds. So just wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. So I think I mentioned this in my opening remarks. Obviously, red tape reduction is an extremely important element to the government of Alberta's mandate to reduce red tape, reduce burden, make things more clear in terms of reporting and applying for funds. Alberta education is held to a significant target around red tape reduction. And what we're attempting to do is strike the appropriate balance between making sure that we're effectively managing taxpayer dollars from a program delivery point of view, but also, again, providing greater clarity, eliminating redundant steps, and ensuring that what we're asking for from school authorities is needed in order to be accountable with those dollars. So over the last year and a half, we've undertaken a significant amount of analysis on our programming around conditional grants, around our funding model, and around reporting that surrounds that. Engaged with stakeholder leaders and system leaders, and we've actually seen a 15% reduction in red tape across the department. And a lot of that actually centers around application processes and reporting processes that relate to providing money to the system. And so our work's not done in that regard. We still have some additional red tape reduction targets that we need to accomplish over the next year and a half, but we are on target with that 15% reduction based on that in-depth engagement that we undertook with system leaders over the last 18 months.
Excellent. And thank you very much for the response. I just want to pivot a little into a slightly different direction for my last question. It has to deal with specifically the effects that the pandemic has had on First Nations, meeting Inuit students. Just outside of Spruce Grove and Stony Plain, we have Paul Band First Nation to the west, Enoch First Nation to the east, and obviously many students in those two First Nations communities are obviously, coming to Spruce Grove and Stony Plain to receive their education. And so I guess my question is, on page 15 of the annual report, it highlights the supports provided to First Nations meeting Inuit throughout the 2020 and 2021 school year. But I would like the department to provide the committee with maybe a more detailed account of the supports provided to these students in schools.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the question. I have some details here I'm going to share with you. So obviously, one of our top priorities is supporting Fnmi learners across the province. It's an important part of our business plan, and it's an important part of our strategic mandate. And so within that context, Fnmi students attending provincial schools were eligible for supports provided within their schools. However, no COVID dedicated funding specifically was allocated to Fnmi learners because we know that in attending our schools, they would have all of the supports that we were providing to the entire system. As school authorities were given the flexibility to direct funding and supports as required, as always. And so with our new funding model, we've been able to consolidate the number of grants and the number of restrictions that a school authority was subjected to under the previous model, which allows them flexibility to adapt their programming to specific populations within their school authority. And we've seen that flexibility in action already within the COVID response. With respect to supporting successful outcomes for Fnmi learners and eliminating that achievement gap between those learners and other learners within the system, there are a series of programs that we do deliver. We do have a number of direct funding relationships with a number of nations across the province to develop additional teaching resources, to identify unique pedagogy strategies for teachers in adapting content for Fnmi learners, and for setting education outcomes and building capacity with staff to better support that very important population group within the K-12 system. So we can provide you a significant amount of detail on those programs, but out of respect for your time, I think you're at 3 minutes and 30 seconds. We can provide that, or if you want, I can delve more deeply into the programming, whichever you prefer.
Yes, thank you for the comprehensive answer. I think if you could send it in the form of a written format afterwards, that would be appropriate. I know many of my caucus colleagues have a number of questions as well. So, but if you could just submit that answer in writing, I think that would be appropriate. I guess just before I turn it over, I again just want to commend the incredible work that you guys have done. Mr. Tremblay, you and your department officials over the last year, it has been trying, obviously with COVID-19, and you have a very incredible burden to bear, and thank you very much for the work you do, as well as just all of the education professionals and teachers I know that are paying attention to this video as well. Maybe not at this point because they're probably in school, but afterwards I'm sure many of them will be paying attention. So again, thank you very much for the work that you do, and at this point I'll turn it over to my colleague Emily Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, member. Mr. Tremblay, I've not yet had the opportunity of meeting you and your team, but just wanted to say good morning to you. Thank you so much for the work that you do, and just wanted to echo what my fellow colleague has stated here. We're so grateful for the work that you've done to get us through COVID. I mean, we're not out of the water just yet, but we have suffered our piece as part of this global pandemic. And, you know, education is very important to every generation, and we want to make sure that our kids get the education that they need. I had a lot of constituents reach out to me over the since COVID began, expressing all kinds of different concerns. And lots of them decided that they wanted to homeschool their children for various reasons. You know, some families have immune-compromised individuals, and they just felt that it would be safer to keep their kids at home and limit exposure. So I'm so glad that, you know, we've got parental choice, and if people want to homeschool their children, that can be an option for them. And in my community, you know, we've got the Battle River School Division, Elk Island Catholic School Division. We also have the Kingman Christian Academy, and a new charter school that they're looking at putting up in the Holden area. So, you know, I wish success to all of these different groups. So now to my questions here. So the first outcome for the department is extremely clear and very important. Outcome 1 is analyzed on pages 16 through 55. I would like to ask some questions based on the information provided in this section. Page 16 mentions that $7.8 million was spent on curriculum renewal, K-12 in 2020-21. Can the ministry explain precisely what this means? Particularly, can the ministry explain the difference between the new draft curriculum and the renewed curriculum?
New curriculum refers to the overall project to review and develop new curriculum, while the new draft curriculum is used to reference the draft that was released on March 29th of 2021. A curriculum renewal includes the development of new K-12 curriculum in 8 subjects in both English.
Thank you, Deputy. We'll now go over to the official opposition for the second rotation of 9 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want to go back to this issue of $1 billion in additional COVID supports. I think the Deputy Minister, in his response to Member Turton's question, said that there was $250 million for capital maintenance renewal, $244 million for the critical worker benefit, $250 million from the Feds for Safe Restart, and then said that there was an additional amount of money for funding for the 25,000 students that didn't show up, and then PPE and online learning. Can the Deputy Minister break down how much the government spent on PPE and on online learning?
Sure, thanks. Maybe I'll talk to PPE. So we did provide very early on in the COVID response $10 million to the system for PPE, and that was to provide PPE for all staff, students, and teachers within the system. So that's just the clarifying point that you asked. Christine, do you have information on the online funding pieces for MLA Schmidt? Perhaps if you could give us a minute, we're just going to grab that number if that's okay.
And if you can provide that in writing, that would be fine. If you could table that, I would appreciate it. I want to go to the $244 million in capital maintenance and renewal. Now, you said in your introductory remarks that there was $44 million for HVAC repairs. Can you tell me how you assess? Is it fair to say that the ministry targeted $244 million in capital maintenance and renewal on projects that would enhance safety for children from COVID in schools?
So, capital maintenance program. I want to maybe provide a bit of context around that, how that program works. And so we set the funding amount in a particular budget, and the individual maintenance priorities are set by school authorities themselves. And so
in this budget year, the department didn't direct school authorities to direct their capital maintenance and renewal to COVID-specific measures.
Again, if we would have directed authorities to do that, there may have been a misbalance in priority setting at a local level based on the individual knowledge that school authorities have on their infrastructure assets.
So thank you very much, Deputy Minister. Is it the position of Alberta Education and the Government of Alberta that COVID-19 is airborne?
Really directed towards Alberta Health and our Chief Medical Officer of Health.
Did you ever ask the question of that to the Chief Medical Officer of Health when setting your infrastructure priorities for the year?
Information around how COVID spreads or whether it's airborne or not. Obviously, that's something that's more appropriately directed towards the Chief Medical Officer.
But the question to you, Deputy Minister, did the Department of Education ask the Chief Medical Officer of Health that question and respond by reprioritizing your infrastructure priorities?
HVAC-related projects across the system, which is a significant increase over any other year that we provided CMR accelerated funding.
How many HVAC systems did that upgrade, and were those upgrades sufficient to deal with airborne COVID in schools?
Any sort of conjecture I might have on the efficacy of HVAC systems as it relates to evolving information on COVID would be more appropriately placed with the Department of Health.
Do you know if school authorities consulted with the Department of Health when they were upgrading their HVAC systems?
Elements of all of our infrastructure priority setting, whether it's capital maintenance or capital investment and construction. One key element to that capital process is health and safety. It's a key criteria for setting any of our health or any of our infrastructure priorities in the system. And we know that school authorities consult with a number of different agencies in setting those priorities at a local level based on our funding framework.
This is the longest way to say no to the answer to that question that I've ever heard. So congratulations, Andre. The other $200 million in capital maintenance and renewal, what COVID safety measures were those directed to? Does the department know?
So I'll turn it over to ADM Joseph, who is our lead on capital planning, if you're okay with that, Emily Schmidt, and she can make an attempt at your question. Sure.
Thank you very much for the question. And I just wanted to provide a little bit more information on how those dollars are directed. So the $250 million that was provided in capital maintenance and renewal was provided to the system, and the school authorities themselves actually report into the Department of Education in terms of what they feel their priorities are. And they do assess those based on the criteria that we've outlined earlier. And one of them is health and safety concerns. And so the school authorities themselves would determine what health and safety concerns they may want addressed. The department then assesses the prioritization of the school authorities as well. Essentially does a double check against the criteria that we were using. But that $250 million that was provided in terms of the actual expenditure, primarily the prioritization was completed by the school authorities themselves.
So you just said that you double check the prioritization. Did you reinforce or did you even look to see if COVID-19 safety measures were the top priority for school authorities when making these decisions?
Yeah, so there are areas that we look at around health and safety, of which there's health, safety, and security of students or staff, either immediate or in the long term. But the initial assessment is done by the school authority itself. And then we go back through and re-examine that assessment. We don't actually go back and, I guess, do a fulsome double check, I suppose, on the minutia of that. But we do a high-level overview and a review of all the criteria, which includes.
What I'm hearing in the 30 seconds that I have left is that you're saying that you spent $244 million on COVID supports, but you actually had no mechanisms whatsoever in place to direct school authorities to actually spend that money on measures that would effectively mitigate the risk of transmission of COVID in schools. Is that correct?
$2 million was stimulus funding for capital maintenance.
That's not what you said at the beginning of the meeting.
Thank you. We'll now move over to the government caucus for the second rotation, which is 9 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Tremblay. I'll just pick up where I left off. So we were talking about page 16, where it's mentioned that $7.8 million were spent on curriculum renewal, K-12 in 2021. Can the ministry explain precisely what this means? Particularly, can the ministry explain the difference between the new draft curriculum and renewed curriculum? And can the ministry provide details on how these funds were spent?
Sure, thanks. And so it might be a little bit repetitive here, just because we got into this question during the previous rotation. But again, renewed curriculum refers to the overall project to review and develop new K-12 curriculum, while new draft curriculum is used to reference the draft that was released on March 29th, 2021, the K-6 draft. Curriculum renewal includes the development of new K-12 curriculum in 8 subjects in both English and French, in alignment with the 2020 Ministerial Order on Student Learning and the guiding framework for the design and development of kindergarten to grade 12 provincial level curriculum. Alberta K-12 curriculum is transforming to a knowledge-based curriculum where students develop essential knowledge as the foundation for critical thinking, as well as cultural and civic literacy. Maintenance of existing K-12 curriculum is ongoing until the new curriculum is developed and fully implemented. As to how the funds were spent, $7.6 million was spent on content development for 8 subjects in both English and French. $217,000 was spent on engagement activities, including the curriculum working group, which obviously was a key component to developing the new draft, and analysis of public survey results, and the engagement process around the Ministerial Order on Student Learning. With respect to your question on so I think that I'll just stop there, actually.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Tremblay. My next question is on page 18 of the annual report. It mentions the collaboration between the ministry and Enriched Academy in offering a financial literacy pilot project for grades 10 through 12. What metrics were in place to measure the success of this project? And according to the metrics, was the pilot project a success?
Sure, thanks for that. With respect to your questions on the financial literacy program with Enrich, the collaboration through a conditional grant was targeted to reach 3,000 students in grades 10, 11, and 12 by the Enriched Academy online course to learn more about money management. The pilot project was measured and evaluated in 3 ways. Students completed a pre and post assessment to measure their growth in understanding basic financial knowledge. Students completed a survey rating the course and providing feedback on its benefits and the areas for improvement, and teachers completed a survey to provide feedback on the course. The pilot project was very successful. The final report indicated that Enriched Academy actually reached over 4,500 students in grades 10, 11, and 12. The final report indicated that both teachers and students gave Enriched Academy a very high mark, an A, for the course. Students' knowledge and comfort level with money more than doubled after taking the Enriched Academy course, and 84% of teachers felt Enriched was a good addition overall to their course offerings. And actually 91% of teachers felt the pilot and Enriched Academy should be expanded to all students across the province.
Well, thank you for the answer, Mr. Tremblay. Pages 20 and 21 go through what was done to increase opportunities for students to engage in hands-on learning experiences. Can the ministry provide some details on the different initiatives the ministry undertook to achieve this, and how successful were these initiatives?
Thanks for that question. And vocational education have equal value, merit, and worth as a university degree. I actually was previously the ADM of apprenticeship many years ago, and that applied learning model is crucial, not only to provide learners with broader opportunities and career options, but also it has a direct correlation to the health of the overall economy. Career education programming from 5 to 10 includes a number of different elements, and I'm going to go through it right now. Career and Technology Foundations, which is grades 5 to 9, is designed to enable students to explore their interests while learning various occupations through on-hand experience. Career and Technology Studies, grades 10 to 12, offers flexible programming that enables schools to design unique programs and meet student needs and draw on community resources. Dual credit at grades 10 to 12 provides opportunities for students to earn credits for high school and for post-secondary simultaneously through applied learning. Off-campus education programming, grades 10 to 12, through the Green Certificate Program, Registered Apprenticeship Program, RAP, and Work Experience. All of those things provide education opportunities to investigate a variety of different career opportunities and gain practical experience. And many of those students actually forge a relationship with an employer that actually is sustained beyond their educational experience, both obviously within a K-12 context, but also within a post-secondary context as well.
Well, thank you so much for the answers, Mr. Tremblay, and again, the work that you and your team do. And with that, I would like to cede the remainder of my time to my colleague, MLA Reid.
Mr. Tremblay, thank you to you and your team for joining us today. Appreciate having you here and discussing the activities of the ministry over the last year. I also want to extend my appreciation for the work that the ministry has done to try to maintain as much normalcy as we can for our children and to ensure that they still have access to quality education during these difficult times. I think that's an essential part of the recovery of our province and the world, is to ensure that our children are well looked after and equipped for the future. So thank you for all that you have done. I really just have one question and focusing on outcome 2 from your annual report. Related to Objective 2.2, and it states, ensuring First Nation students have access to the provincial education system. The annual report then goes on to outline the innovations in First Nations grant program, which supports a partnership between our First Nations and our provincial school jurisdictions to develop projects, and to give more supports to our students and our staff and our caregivers on our First Nations. Specifically on page 58, it mentions that the department managed 51 ongoing projects totaling approximately $31 million. I'd like to ask if the ministry could outline your role in managing these projects, what oversight is in place to ensure that the funding is spent as efficiently and effectively as possible so that we are truly delivering the best outcomes for our new First Nation students.
Appreciate it, and obviously a foundational part of our business plan and our annual report on how we need to support FNMI learners across the system. So I'll get into a bit on the grant management side of things first, if that works for you. So the department does undertake grant management activities, including the review and approval of proposals, as well as the review and approval of interim and final reports. Conditional grant applications and proposals are reviewed by our FNMI directorate. We're actually a very unique department from that perspective, where we actually have an ADM and a team that's solely dedicated to advancing FNMI educational outcomes across the system. And so that group actually puts their, sorry. For you.
Well, I'm sure we'll get back to it, Deputy. If you're skilled enough, you'll be able to bring it back. Now, we're going to move over to the government side for, I believe it's the third application tonight.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just a quick question for Mr. Tremblay. As a Deputy Minister, were you aware of the significant and persistent concerns from Alberta parents, educators, content experts, and school divisions about the curriculum in this fiscal year that we're talking about?
Well, thanks for the question. And as you know, we released a draft in March of 2021.
Question was, were you aware of the concerns? Just a yes or no is good.
Significant survey responses with a whole bunch of different perspectives on the curriculum.
Okay, so I'd like to move on then. I'd like to ask about the work of the curriculum. The annual report reads like the ministry is very proud of this work, but there's been a huge blowback from parents. The Alberta Teachers Association has passed a non-confidence vote on the minister because of the proposed curriculum. The Association of Alberta Deans of Education released a statement saying they weren't supportive of it either. So a few questions on this topic. So first, in 2020-21, you had a plan to pilot this curriculum for the following year. Internally, you must have had some kind of threshold for the number of students needed to participate in piloting. Put another way, a large enough sample to account for geographic variation, income variation, new Canadians, recent immigrants, people with disabilities, Franco-Albertans, amongst the student base across all subjects. So my question is simply, what percentage of students did you need to pilot the curriculum in order to get the feedback that you needed as a ministry?
In terms of statistical relevance, the fact that we do have over 360 teachers piloting the curriculum across the system with all grades and all subjects will give us a strong indication of the effectiveness of the curriculum in the classroom from an applied perspective.
360 teachers, but what percentage of students did you need to pilot the curriculum in order to get the feedback that you needed?
Again, anytime you have field testing and applied testing of curriculum in the classroom, it is a valuable component to informing whether that curriculum needs to stand.
10%, 15%, what percentage would the ministry establish as a benchmark? There's got to be a number.
We have teachers actually piloting the curriculum in the classroom. It is beneficial to informing.
160 teachers piloting the curriculum is sufficient for the province of Alberta. Is that what you're saying?
We do have teachers piloting all subjects and all grades. That is an important part of our overall engagement process.
Curriculum pilot of 360 teachers for the entire province is sufficient?
Point of order, Madam Chair. So, Madam Chair, yeah, I do have a point of order. Sorry, I feel that the member is persistently, needlessly repeating the same question to the point of needling Mr. Tremblay.
Official opposition?
Yeah, well, Member Lovely is just making up the standing orders. There's nothing in the standing orders that she referred to even as a point of order, so I would recommend that we move on.
Thank you, Member Schmidt. I will just remind the members that when points of order are called, one should make reference to a standing order that is relevant. Let's now move on.
So let me try this differently. What were the ministry's expectations on the number of school boards that would be willing to pilot the curriculum? There's got to be a number. It's got to be a threshold, a benchmark. What is acceptable? What is not?
For us, we entered the process of piloting, knowing that, like many other of our elements of the system, we always provide a level of discretion for individual school boards and school authorities. And so we didn't...
To interrupt again, but I've got very little time. And my question is actually quite simple. I tried to get an answer from the ministry before. This is a big deal. This is a new curriculum. There's a lot of students. So there has to be a benchmark so that we can evaluate the work that this ministry is doing. So the question is quite simple. What were the ministry's expectations on the number of school boards that would be willing to pilot this curriculum?
Yeah, so I'll restate our objectives as a department. And maybe I'll restate...
Actually, I'm going to move on if you're unwilling to answer that question. So what message does it send when 95% of school boards, representing approximately 99% of students, are refusing to pilot any elements of the curriculum?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The point of order is standing order. The member speaks to matters other than the question under discussion. Madam Chair, the committee has convened for the purpose of considering the Minister's account, particularly the outstanding recommendations from the Office of Auditor General and Ministry's Annual Report 2020-21. The matter that has been raised by the member is not within the boundaries of the said topic. The matter that was mentioned by the member is outside of the topic at the hand of the committee today. Madam Chair, thereby making it a point of order 23B, warranting the member to be called to order. Madam Chair, the draft K-6 curriculum is not within the matters this committee have convened today. May I remind the member that the survey regarding the draft curriculum is still ongoing and will end by the February 2022. And I will encourage the member to engage.
Thank you, honorable member. Thank you. I believe that you have made your point that the point of order is under the relevant standing order that is outside the matters. Official opposition, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Page 16 and 17 of the annual report clearly outlines the process that was gone through around the curriculum development within the scope of this committee's review. Other members of this committee have already asked questions about curriculum development, and the ministry officials themselves have been commenting on it. Clearly, the curriculum development which happened within this year is within the scope of this committee's review.
Yes, in fact, in the minister's letter on page 6 of the annual report, it is one of the first matters that is dealt with in terms of the curriculum development process. The member is advised to keep her comments within that around the draft process and the metrics, resources, and outcomes that were expected from that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we understand that 95% of school boards, representing roughly 99% of students, are refusing to pilot any elements of the curriculum. Mr. Tremblay, I'm sure that your department is aware of this. The public is aware of this. Parents, educators, content experts, school divisions, they're aware of this. Why did your ministry choose not to hit pause and go back to the drawing board?
So, there's multiple ways that school authorities can provide feedback on the curriculum. I know your questions are focusing on the piloting, and I've attempted to answer your questions in that regard. We're also offering a number of different flexible means in which school authorities can provide detailed feedback on the curriculum if they've chosen not to pilot. We've actually received a significant amount of written correspondence from a number of different school authorities across the system with their detailed feedback, and obviously we would accept and deeply consider that feedback as well.
Mr. Tremblay, I understand that what your answer is, that you've told us that there are ways that people can provide feedback, and we are well aware of that. That was not my question. And, you know, the community that I represent, St. Albert, the two school boards have been abundantly clear that they do not support this. They've given feedback, and they still don't support this, as do many others across the province. But I'm going to move on. So I'd like to ask some questions about the hiring process that led to Mr. Chris Champion being selected to write significant portions of the curriculum that is mentioned in this annual report. Mr. Champion wasn't hired into the minister's office, but he was contracted by the department. So my first question is this: was Mr. Champion hired through a competitive hiring process?
Parts to your question, but maybe before we get into that, I'll be really clear about how curriculum is developed within a government context.
No, my question was about the hiring process, about Mr. Chris Champion. So we've moved on from curriculum. Perhaps you can give us that in writing if you like. That would be great. So let's talk about the hiring process of Mr. Champion.
I just want to clarify a component of your question where you said the individual wrote curriculum. That's factually inaccurate. Curriculum is written by department staff. Advisors advise on curriculum. So I just want to make sure.
So let's change that to he advised on curriculum. So can you tell me about the hiring process of Mr. Champion? Was it a competitive hiring process?
So I will ask Jennifer Cassidy to come in and talk about how we work with subject matter experts. So Jennifer, if you want to come to the open chair.
Thank you for the question, and good morning. I'm Jennifer Cassidy, Acting Assistant Deputy Minister of the Curriculum Division. Subject matter experts are involved in the curriculum development process. They provide advice and recommendations into content that may be included in the draft curriculum. They work with department staff in the writing of content that staff are responsible for.
I'm going to intervene again. I have only less than a minute left, and I appreciate the information on how subject experts are used. And, you know, if the department would like to give us more information in writing, that'd be appreciated. I have a question for you, Mr. Tremblay. So given the ministry business plan and the outcomes that are clearly outlined for us, how does hiring Mr. Chris Champion align with the outcomes and goals of the ministry? Knowing what you know about his previous work, I'd like you to talk about how his work aligns with the outcomes of the ministry.
So again, we took on a number of subject matter experts for their perspectives on curriculum. Curriculum is developed by department staff. We received.
Thank you. We'll now go to the government side.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Deputy Minister, I'd just like to invite you to continue to respond to my question from the last block, if you could, give you an opportunity to respond to our participation and work with our Indigenous and First Nations folks.
Work with the system on a regular basis with regards to a number of different grants. And so I'll talk about the key priorities for these grants. So a number of the priorities we focus on through our investments is early childhood education in primary schools, student-centered supports, children and youth not in school, parental caregiver engagement, and obviously Indigenous languages. In considering each of the applications, they're evaluated based on whether the proposed goals and activities align with the purpose of the Innovation and First Nations Education Grant Program, which is our primary grant program in the system. That the activities in the proposal are measurable, whether they are in duplication of proposed activities or similar projects, and that planned activities are achievable within the time frame specified. So ultimately, what we want to see is progress around achievement and progression and participation. And the grants are actually constructed in the way that when the dollars are disseminated into the system, that communities can report back on that process and on the achievement of the dollars. And we do require interim reports and ongoing reporting to ensure that those dollars are focused on improving FNMI outcomes across the system.
Thank you very much. I'd like to cede the balance of my time to Ms. Armstrong-Hominick, please.
Excellent teachers, school leaders, school authority leaders, and as most of us can probably attest to, we've had great teachers in the past that have led us to be the compassionate, wonderful human beings we are today. And I just want to take this moment to thank all the great teachers that I've had and everyone else. And also, I would like to put a big shout out to my school boards in my area, which would be Elk Island Public, Elk Island Catholic, Buffalo Trail School Division, and the St. Paul as our Educational Division, SPURD it's called. It's a very diverse school board, and there's many, many great schools in it also. So my question for you is, obviously a key part of our education system is the teachers, school leaders, and school authority leaders. In the 2020-21 year, presented new challenges to all of these all three of these groups, but also presented opportunities to innovate in ways that may have not occurred under normal circumstances. On pages 95 and 96, outline some of the initiative the ministry took to support the development of the teaching workforce in areas of demand and need. Through the chair, can you tell the committee the details of these initiatives?
There are 4 different programs which address the development of teaching workforce in areas of demand and need. Alberta Education has partnered with Fort Vermilion School Division and the Northern Alberta Development Council under Jobs and Economy and Innovation to administer the Bursary program. It's called the Northern Student Teacher Bursary Program. Students apply online through the NADC website administered under Jobs, Economy and Innovation. The NSTB applications are collected in September to align with the beginning of the university term. NADC receives applications through their online application system and monitors student enrollment status and post-grad employment. NADC tracks teachers' months of return teaching service and eligible school authorities and provides status reports to Alberta Education. Practicum coordinators at teacher education programs help distribute information about the program and encourage applicable students to apply. Students who receive the bursary are tracked as they apply for teacher certification and begin working through employment submissions made by school authorities to Education Teacher Workforce Information System. This enables tracking of where they are working in the north and for how long. We also have a program called the Rural Practicum Bursary. Alberta Education has partnered with Fort Vermilion School Division and Teacher Education Universities to administer the bursary program. University Practicum coordinators collect completed application forms. Teacher preparation programs across the province place students and validate student bursary applications prior to bursaries being awarded. University Practicum coordinators send eligible application applications to Alberta Education. Alberta Education reviews those to confirm eligibility, and Fort Vermilion School Division disperses funds to successful applicants. I want to talk a little bit about the CTS Bridge to Certification program. So Alberta Education partners with school authorities in the University of Alberta to administer the CTS Bridge to Certification program. The program allows individuals with subject expertise as certified journey persons, healthcare professionals, and information technologists to complete a minimum of 36 credits of teacher education, after which they are conditionally authorized to work as a teacher. Funding is provided via a conditional grant from the department to each eligible school authority. The school uses these funds to support the CTS program participants while the individuals enrolled in their teacher preparation program. Participants each receive $50,000 in funding support. The bridging program is available to public, separate, Francophone, independent, and First Nation school authorities, so it has broad application across the system. School authorities select a participant who meets the school authority's needs for a CTS teacher. That individual will need to meet the University of Alberta's Bachelor of Education admission requirements. I also want to talk about the Math Bursary program. That program is administered again by the department. Teachers apply through a dedicated bursary mailbox for pre-approval to ensure they are taking an approved math pedagogy course. Upon course completion, teachers can then apply for the bursary funding, which is paid out of education's budget. All four initiatives were very successful. The Northern Student Teacher Bursary provided funding to 20 students for $160,000 in total. The Rural Practicum Bursary, there's 30 Rural Practicum Bursaries awarded in 2021 for a total of $60,000. 30 teacher education students from 6 post-secondaries were supported from across the province. The CTS Bridge to Certification program, there was $750,000 provided for that, with 15 individual Bridge to Certification participants. Under the Math Bursary program, 122 individual awards were provided for a total of $124,000. So as you can see, we are supporting teacher development across the province in a very targeted way. And with that, I'll conclude and take any other questions.
Thank you, Deputy. We'll now go to the official opposition side.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Deputy. I'm just going to ask you respectfully for a very straightforward yes or no answer to this question. And if you're unable to give a yes or no answer, I'm afraid, at least for our members, we're going to have to assume the answer is no. Was Chris Champion hired as a subject matter expert for the curriculum through a competitive process? Thank you. Can you please table for this committee a copy of Mr. Champion's contract, please? I'd appreciate if you could just provide that in writing. I'm now going to turn it over to, can I actually get confirmation of that? That you will table that? Table.
I'll have to get back to you on that, on what the privacy elements of that is.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to my colleague, MLA Schmidt.
Thank you very much. My questions are about the back to school plan in September of 2020. Now, the plan allowed for significant variations across the province in how education was delivered. For example, at Edmonton Public Schools, kids could choose quarterly whether to learn online or in person. But Calgary Public decided to allow the switch only once in January. We have one curriculum and one set of education standards, but when it came to COVID-19 planning, apparently each school division was allowed to determine its own way of delivering it. What was the public policy justification for this kind of direction?
Thanks for the question. And so for that question, I'll provide the following. Obviously, there was provincial level guidelines and public health requirements for some elements of society. Within the K-12 system, we did have provincial requirements around masking, sanitation, cleaning, and a number of other areas. However, in terms of individual decisions that were made around shifting classrooms or grade cohorts, that was left to individual school operators based on their own unique circumstances, predominantly around operational issues. So as an example, as you know, we were doing contact tracing last year, and with contact tracing, there was also a requirement to quarantine that often created shortages of substitute teachers and teaching and administration staff. And for those reasons, we allowed school operators to shift online. We also allowed school operators to deliver curriculum in unique circumstances that work for their own local context in conjunction with consultation with their parents. And so, as you mentioned, there was a quarter system at EPSB. Calgary used something different, but we did leave those decisions, operational decisions, at the discretion of local authorities, as long as they were following overall public health guidelines as set by the Chief Medical Officer of Health. So we were
thank you, Deputy Minister. I think I got the answer to that question. And one of the pieces that you touched on in your answer was this issue around staff. And we know from the budget figures that you significantly underspent even the budgeted amount at the beginning of the year. Presumably, part of that is because there weren't enough teachers hired. And as you said, there was a lot of mandatory isolations that led to this yo-yo of students in and out of the classroom, which is exactly what the ministry said they wanted to avoid when they announced the back-to-school plan in the summer of 2020. So what was the plan to staff up and hire more teachers prior to the 2020 school year beginning?
So staffing is always at a local level. And as you know, in Alberta, with a board-driven public school system, that staffing is at the discretion of local authorities because they're in the best position to understand individual student needs and parent needs based on the trustee governance model that exists in Alberta. And so that's always been the case with regards to staffing decision-making. And we feel that school boards are in the best position to make that determination. Did that mean that there was...
Thank you, Deputy Minister. I mean, it's quite clear from your own budget figures that you reduced the amount of spending even from your budgeted amount. So it boggles the mind to think that they could have hired more staff at the local level without the money in the budget to staff. Did the department consider offering any incentives to bring back teachers who had retired or otherwise left the profession to cover projected teaching shortfalls in the 2020 school year?
Again, we actually maintained and increased funding in the fiscal year we're talking about, not only within the context of our new funding model, but also additional funding received from the federal government. So there was significant resources provided to incent whatever local decision-making was required by school authorities to implement education within their jurisdictions. So
thank you very much, Deputy Minister. If it was up to local school authorities to make their own staffing decisions, then how is it that Alberta Education fired 20,000 people on social media?
Sorry.
Perhaps the Deputy Minister wasn't paying attention, but early on in the pandemic, the Education Minister took to Twitter to inform 20,000 employees of school boards across the province that their services were no longer needed.
Point of order. Point of order. Thank you, Madam Chair. The point of order relates to Order 23H and I for the standing orders. The member makes allegations against the ministry and imputes false or unavowed motives to another ministry there. The member has made allegation detrimental to the person of the minister. The statement made by the member, though may relate to the functions of the minister, also relates to a personal matter, and this claim against the minister is unacceptable. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Opposition?
Simply, Madam Chair, this is clearly within the scope of the review before this committee. There was no impugned motives given to any member of this assembly through the member's comment and question. It was a factual statement about what occurred during the scope of this review. There was no impugned motives.
Thank you. And I do find that there was a government announcement made within the context of the fiscal year under consideration. It was not just put out on social media. There was, in fact, a government announcement as well, but it was also announced on social media, because that is one of the ways that At Your Alberta and others communicate. And so in that sense, it concerns an operational and resourcing decision that was made within the fiscal year under consideration.
Thank you, Chair. It's fair to say that the Department of Education made an announcement that 20,000 people working in the education sector's services were no longer needed. Is this the normal process by which education workers are informed that their jobs have been terminated?
So in terms of your question, are you asking about the notification process for termination of employment? I just want to better understand your question. Sorry, MLA Schmidt.
Well, help me understand. School boards, it was up to school boards to hire people, but it looks like it was up to the Department of Education to fire people. Is that correct? Does the Department of Education direct school boards to fire people?
We don't, no.
So then explain to me how is it that the Department of Education could let 20,000 people know through government announcement that their services were no longer needed? Is that the normal process for terminating positions in school board authorities?
So we know that we hold employment agreements with individuals that teach within the K-12 system. Those decisions are ultimately made by local authorities based on whatever operational realities that they're dealing with at the time. So I'm not sure about the social media piece. That predates me in terms of how that was articulated, but what I can say is that staffing changes, staffing adjustments, the deployment of staffing budgets, and anything related to resourcing the K-12 system from a human perspective is undertaken by individual school authorities based on the budget that they receive from the Alberta government, which, as I've mentioned on a number of occasions earlier during this session, was actually maintained and increased in the fiscal year we're discussing today.
So what is it that the government announced then? Should they have announced just cuts to the school boards that would have resulted in 20,000 firings?
So again, can't conjecture on that particular announcement. What I can tell you is how the system does work on staffing at a local level.
We'll go back to the government for the next rotation.
Hello there. Back again, Mr. Tremblay. I was just going to tell you that the initiatives you talked about were successful, it sounds like, and they sound like very great initiatives. On page 96, outcome 3.4 discusses collaboration that occurred between education and the Ministry of Advanced Education to enhance the level of subject matter expertise in the teacher workforce. Can you explain, Mr. Tremblay, in greater detail what this collaboration looked like?
Sure, thanks for the question. Alberta's education funding model frees up resources by reducing red tape and administrative costs, while giving school boards the autonomy and flexibility to invest classrooms based on student needs. So we can talk a little bit about the governance aspect of this. I'm just going to put you on mute and talk to my staff for a second. So mute, please. We got our documents mixed up. Apologies for that. We're going to go to Acting ADM Dan Karras at the empty chair to provide an answer to your question. Apologies for our administrative mix-up.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Karras, Acting Assistant Deputy Minister, System Excellence Division. In regards to your question about how the department works with the Ministry of Advanced Education, building on the Deputy Minister Tremblay's earlier comments regarding the CTS Bridge to Certification program. So there's a partnership with the University of Alberta whereby individuals who wish to obtain teacher certification who are journeyman holders, they work closely with the University of Alberta to obtain teacher certification. There's other pieces here as well where we do work closely with the Ministry of Advanced Education. So the Ministry of Advanced Education works closely with us in regards to memorandums of agreement. So there's MOAs between Alberta Education and Advanced Education in regards to teacher certification. So we ensure that teacher education programs align with both the education's teacher quality standard, and we undertake any necessary program alignments under advanced education mechanisms. The MOAs with the teacher education universities are for all the Bachelor of Education programs. Under these MOAs, we received confirmation of approximately 2,000 Alberta BEd graduates per year who are recommended for teacher certification by the Deans of Education. Certification is issued and tracked through Education's Teacher Workforce Information System. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to cede my time over to my colleague, MLA Jordan Walker.
Well, thank you so much, Chair. And thank you, Deputy Minister Tremblay, for being here. I've really enjoyed the discourse today, and I really noted your comments on school choice. One of the biggest reasons I ran was to ensure and enshrine school choice into law, and we're so happy we achieved that. Promise made, promise kept. Now, my questions will focus, Deputy Minister, on Alberta's K-12 education system in terms of governance and management. I know in my area in Sherwood Park, we have two great school boards, and we have a francophone system as well. Mr. Deputy Minister, we just announced a new K-12 francophone school, which we're very happy about. And so all of these matters are very important to my constituents. And so my first question, Deputy Minister, is outcome 4 for the department relates to governance and management. Key parts of this desired outcome that I would like to focus a few questions on, outcomes 4.2 and 4.3 and 4.4. Now, page 108 lists some of the details of the new funding formula for school authorities that was introduced in 2020-21. 2021. Can the department really go into the detail, Deputy Minister, of this formula and explain the impact it had on the education system over the past year? Thanks.
Alberta's education funding model frees up resources by reducing red tape and administrative costs. And so apart from the cap on system administration, none of the grants in the new model are targeted to school authorities. So school authorities do have the flexibility to allocate their resources to best meet their student needs. And we've talked about that numerous times during our meeting today, that local flexibility is extremely important. Because not every school authority is the same in terms of its geographic context, its student mix, its staffing mix, and certainly what's occurring in the broader community. An efficient and sustainable funding model for K-12 education ensures all schools have the resources they need with that local flexibility. The previous funding model was not flexible enough to contain costs and involved too much administration. And overall, it wasn't a sustainable model. We had numerous grants that compartmentalized funding into different categories, which ultimately created less flexibility for school authorities. And so what we've been able to do is not only is the new system predictable in terms of a school authority being able to ultimately calculate what they'll receive in future years based on their past, current, and projected enrollment. So they can almost calculate their funding before the allocation occurs. But we've also consolidated many of the grants that we actually had in place into fewer grants, so school authorities can flex those funds in a more responsive way. Obviously still being required to report in on the results of those dollars. And so the ultimate shift in governance was meant to increase predictability, increase flexibility, acknowledge the local autonomy of school boards and administrators, but still make sure that we're managing the overall cost of the education system at a macro level. And so it was really about striking that critical balance to ensure that local autonomy and overall fiscal accountability was an important part of how the governance would unfold from a decision-making perspective on the ground.
Well, thank you, Deputy Minister, for that very thorough answer. And I would say I think you did, your department has struck that balance, and I really appreciated your comments around flexibility. We have a great multiplicity of choice in our school system, and that's what parents that I talk to want and appreciate, and we have that as well in Sherwood Park. I see my time is done. Thank you, Chair.
Each side has 3 minutes to read questions into the record. I would ask from department officials that they forward the responses to the committee clerk within 30 days. Official opposition, your 3 minutes begins when you start speaking.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the Deputy and Department officials, can you please table for this committee a detailed breakdown of how many students were enrolled in accredited private schools for the 2020-21 school year, as well as how many students were registered in home education programs that were not under the supervision of accredited private schools or school authorities? With respect to the 360 teachers you've indicated are piloting the curriculum this upcoming school year, or this current school year, can you please provide a detailed breakdown of which grades, which subjects, which geographic locations, and which school boards these teachers are teaching in? And I'll turn it over to my colleague, MLA Renewal.
Thank you. So on page 14, there's a note about provincial education helpline that supports parents of students with disabilities. If the ministry would please table the following information: the total cost in this fiscal year for this helpline, the number of FTEs that were assigned to this helpline, and how many individual calls were received in this helpline? And also, what are the evaluation plans for this work? My second question is on page 162, there's a reference to bad debt expense with the Alberta School Foundation Fund, and the minister approved non-payment of property tax for the city of Cold Lake. I'm wondering if the ministry would table details of this decision. My third question is, the deputy minister talked about capital investments around, I think it was at Northlands. So I remember in 2015, there was a significant discussion around the substandard housing for teachers in remote areas, as well as some of the buildings that students were being taught in were needing some work. I'm wondering if the ministry can table a detailed list of the capital maintenance and renewal investments that are being made in the Northlands School Division. And finally, my fourth question is about PUF. If the ministry would please table the exact number for this fiscal that we're looking at, the projected number of students that did not enroll in kindergarten. So the ministry clearly has an idea of how many students chose not to enroll in kindergarten. How many of those students would have been likely to receive PUF funding or were receiving PUF funding? And how many students in kindergarten in the 2020-21 year were receiving PUF funding? And that is it for my questions.
Thank you. I would also like the department to table any information or advice that ministry received from the Chief Medical Officer of Health or any other public health expert on whether or not COVID was airborne, and provide a detailed breakdown of all of the capital maintenance and renewal projects that were funded with the money that was identified in the 2020-21 fiscal year.
Time, I believe, has elapsed, so we'll go over to the government side for their 3 minutes. We'll just allow the clock to restart, and there we go. And your time will start.
Thank you. My question is on recommendations from Office of Auditor General. And what is the progress of work on the Office of Auditor General's outstanding recommendations that the department improve monitoring, assessing, and reporting progress on school jurisdictions' accumulated reserve balances? And what is the progress of work on the Office of Auditor General's outstanding recommendation that the department provide oversight of the system to improve student attendance in Northland School Division? And what is the progress of work on the Office of Auditor General's outstanding recommendation that the Northland School Division develop a plan to improve student attendance? And what is the progress of work on the Office of Auditor General's outstanding recommendation that the Northland School Division improve its guidance and procedures to monitor and enforce student attendance? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Does that work? We still have 1 minute, 40 seconds.
This is just to read questions into the record at this point. So for written follow-up is the way that we handle these 3-minute blocks.
Oh, my mistake. Apologies.
Government side, do you have any additional questions to read into the record? I'll just give you a moment there, and seeing none unless someone pipes up. We're good? Okay. Then
Sorry.
Move on to business. Just gonna look for a
You're good. No, we're all good, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to other business then, honourable members. Is there any other business for our meeting arising today? Hearing and seeing none, we'll move on to the date of the next meeting, which is Tuesday, November 16th, with the Ministry of Seniors and Housing. And we'll now move on to our adjournment portion. Those who are at the table, please be reminded to remove your own bottles and cups for the safety of LAO staff. And I'll call for a motion to adjourn. Would a member move that the meeting this morning be adjourned? I'm seeing that from Deputy Chair Reid. Thank you. All in favor? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Are there any opposed? Thank you very much, honorable members.